Hello and welcome everyone to the Scarborough Charter signing and launch. My name is Karima Hashmani and I am the co-convener and executive director, Equity, Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Toronto. Today is a day that I have been looking forward to for the past year since you all joined us at the National Dialogues in October. This is when our collective work began, where Black students, staff, faculty, and allies engaged in discussion on the challenges, barriers, and developed concrete actions to address anti-Black racism and promote Black inclusion within higher education. This work continued after the National Dialogues. I am proud of the collaborative work that the Interinstitutional Advisory Committee and our national partners have developed the Scarborough Charter. The commitment from academic institutions across Canada is clear today. It is a recognition of anti-Black racism in our structures, policies, and processes, and it is our collective work to ensure Black communities can thrive in our institutions. Our commitment to transparency and accountability as we move forward is so critical. Today, we all come together on the launch and signing of the Scarborough Charter as it comes to life, and I'm excited to share it with you all today. Now, I would like to welcome Mike DeGagne, President and Chief Executive Officer, Inspire, and UTSC alumnus to deliver the land acknowledgement. Mike?
Thank you very much. I want to first acknowledge that I am here today within the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat Nation, the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The territory is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, this meeting place and the land we call Canada is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land and prosper. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Now I would like to introduce Wisdom Tete, the co-convener and vice president, University of Toronto and principal, University of Toronto Scarborough. Welcome, Wisdom.
Thank you, Karima, and thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, colleagues from across the country for joining us this afternoon. We embraced an intentionally inclusive and participatory process for developing the charter. And what you have before you is the outcome of that process. So thank you all for your role in getting us here. We know that this task has not been easy, and we cannot relent following this launch and assume that the outcome of our commitments will be inevitable. It is great that we have nearly 50 institutions signed on to this charter, the last time I checked. And this is wonderful collective accomplishment that says to all of us, something that is worth doing, it's worth doing well, and we should all be proud of what we've done together. We're confident that the numbers will increase because several institutions are poised to sign. They are not yet on the list because they are proceeding with internal processes required in their particular context. So we look forward to welcoming them to the fold in due course. We should, however, bear in mind the fact that we're a sector with 139 publicly funded colleges and 96 publicly funded universities. So there's still a lot of work to do in extending the commitment of the founding signatories to the rest of the sector. Leadership in getting us there needs to be exercised in a concerted way in different places, not just by those who occupy high office in our institutions, although they have a greater responsibility and a greater opportunity to exercise the privileges of office for the collective good. We are all diminished by a country and a sector that has been selective in who is deserving of equity through the structures and systems of exclusion founded on our country's colonial history. The higher educational sector reflects these structures of exclusion and has been complicit in its formation, replication, and perpetuation through our mechanisms for determining who gets in, how they get in, whose knowledge and experiences and accomplishments are valued. Slide up, please. The slide that is going up will provide you with a snapshot and a glimpse of what it means for the kind of system that we have had in place for a long time. So I think it's important that all of us need to sustain the momentum of this historic effort to change what is on this screen by continuing to apply self, downward, upward, and horizontal accountability mechanisms to ensure that the fundamental commitment to and the essence of treating every member of our community as equity deserving becomes an embedded part of how we operate as institutions. The parochialism and insularity of exclusion is a riskier proposition than the embracing of inclusion, because the benefits of the latter will ultimately be exponentially greater for all. So this is everyone's responsibility within the academy, not just senior leadership and boards, but also faculty associations, student organizations, and employee unions. As members of the higher education community, we should demonstrate the courage to do what is right, not only when it is easy and convenient, but particularly when it is most challenging to do so. We should eschew the temptation to pander to the performativity of convenient rhetoric or feeble gestures towards inclusion, while ceding to the powerful forces of the status quo. Those who have the system stacked against them do not have the luxury of marking time for the slow clock of convenience to run its course. As signatories of the Charter have demonstrated, if change is important, and more importantly, if inclusive change is the right thing to do, it can be done with collaborative, good faith, and thoughtful, context-responsive actions that are mutually beneficial. Charity, they say, begins at home. If we as a sector do it right, we can lead change in the broader society for a just, humane, and mature democracy that upholds through action the fundamental inviolability of an equity-deserving framework as a central normative pillar. If we had started from here, the most vulnerable amongst us, like the Indigenous children whose unmarked graveyards blot our lands and scar our conscience, would not have been treated the way they were. Nor would the African slaves and their descendants be the object of a derisive and dehumanizing colonial civilizing mission whose negative impacts endure. So friends, we're faced with the imperative and the opportunity of now. We should seize them in ways that go beyond the copious statements of support for Black and other marginalized individuals and groups that is our want to do. This is what dozens of signatory institutions of the Scarborough Charter are undertaking to do and to be held accountable for. With everyone's support, we can make our institutions and our sector exemplars of what it means for everyone to be equity deserving so they can flourish and make their best contributions to inclusive excellence and the collective good. So congratulations to all of you, and thank you.
Thank you, Wisdom, for those powerful words. I would like to now welcome MP Greg Fergus, MP for Hull Aylmer and Chair of the Parliamentary Black Caucus, and Philip Landon, Chief Operating Officer of Universities Canada.
I thank you very much, Karima, and I do appreciate the opportunity to join you here today. Normally, I would be joining you as the chair of the Parliamentary Black Caucus and member of Parliament for Hull Aylmer. Normally, I'd be joining you from Hull Aylmer, which is on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. But today, I join you from one of your university members in Calgary, at the University of Calgary. And I think it's appropriate to be in a university setting to really bring greetings from the Parliamentary Black Caucus to Dr. Wissam Tete and the entire university community who have signed on to the Scarborough Charter. This is an important step forward. I think Wisdom's slides that he showed tell the entire story. When you see that although 3.5% of the Canadian population is made up of Black Canadians, only 0.8% of senior university leaders are from that community, and only 1.9% are full-time faculty members. And of course, if we look at our brothers and sisters in the Indigenous communities, you see even more dramatic results. 4.9% of the general population, but yet 2.9 and 1.3% in the respective fields of senior leadership, as well as full-time faculty. These numbers need to change. But they need to change not because it is just the right thing to do. But it needs to change so that we are ensuring that as we create a more inclusive framework for universities, for research, for understanding our society and all elements of how it works, universities play an amazingly important role in that. And so this is the reason why we need to make sure that we have a university community that is truly representative of the richness and the diversity of our Canadian population, and hopefully can even do better. So I want to bring to you, on behalf of Senator Rosemary Moody, co-chair of the Parliamentary Black Caucus, all the members of Parliament and senators who are members of the Parliamentary Black Caucus, our hearty congratulations for making real the university's commitment to making Canada a fairer place to be.
Thanks very much, Greg. Nice to follow you. I'm Philip Landon. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Universities Canada, and I am joining you today from the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Nation. Je suis ravi de voir aboutir la charte de Scarborough et d'assister à son lancement. Au nom de l'Université Canada, je tiens à remercier la Comité consultative interinstitutionnel pour son dévouement à l'égard de la lutte contre le racisme anti-noir et de l'amélioration du milieu de l'enseignement supérieur. The Scarborough Charter will be an important tool as we work collectively as a sector to advance Black excellence. Canada's universities have shown commitment to advancing equity, diversity, and inclusion, but we know that much more needs to be done. We know that communities affected by anti-Black racism need to see institutions taking meaningful action now, and the Charter is a critical resource to support this work. Universities Canada is pleased to have been part of this process throughout the past year, from attending the National Dialogues last fall to hosting sessions with our membership and engaging with the Parliamentary Black Caucus. I'd like to thank Dr. Gervin Kieran and Dr. Wisdom Teddy for their engagement with us and their leadership throughout this process. And we look forward to continuing our work with this group and with signatories. As next steps, Universities Canada will post the Charter on our website alongside our inclusive excellence principles. We will amplify and share the Charter as a guide for universities across the country on addressing anti-Black racism. And Universities Canada will continue to partner in this effort by collaborating with the IIAC and supporting sector-wide efforts to address anti-Black racism. Votre travail aura un effet profond et concret sur le milieu de l'enseignement supérieur. C'est une fierté et un honneur pour l'Université Canada de soutenir vos efforts. Once again, thank you and congratulations on this important launch.
Thank you, Greg and Philip, for your congratulations. We would like to share some video testimonials now on the impact that the Charter will have on the lives of individuals in academia.
In reflecting on the Charter, I thought about what does it mean to me as an Indigenous African Nova Scotian. My family has been in this country for over 400 years. I come from two distinct African Nova Scotian communities of Beachville and Cherrybrook. I have been connected to Dalhousie since the 80s, both as a student, a staff member, a faculty member, and now an administrator. I have watched growth and changes at Dalhousie, and to see a commitment nationally in a charter to improve access and accountability towards people of African descent is exciting for me. As I reflect on the desire to increase and change the curriculum, to increase our number of staff and faculty of African descent, to make a commitment mutually across our institutions, locally and nationally, to identify anti-Black racism, and to do all that we can to increase and support our students, faculty, and staff of African descent warms my soul. I look forward to being a part of these changes and commend all those universities who signed on this charter as we begin to make steps in the right direction to improve access to higher education for people of African descent.
I believe the Scarborough National Charter is a public acknowledgement of the responsibility that post-secondary institutions have in enacting positive social change. Black employees and students like myself have been working tirelessly to have anti-Black racism prioritized within our institutions of higher learning. I see this charter as an extremely positive step in that direction. It carves a path, declares a commitment, a plan forward to address systemic anti-Black racism. I'm hopeful and excited by the transformative action that this marks for the Black community, its allies, and its accomplices.
I can't tell you how excited I am to finally see the coming into effect of the Scarborough Charter. I think for me personally, what this charter represents is a moment of great hope and opportunity. I think the hope, of course, comes from the fact that the charter calls on institutions of higher education to finally create a place of belonging and inclusion for the great intellectual, artistic, personal contributions from Black Canadians. I can't tell you in my 25 years of career how many times I have seen the cost to not only institutions but to the wider society that this exclusion has cost us. And finally, we have a charter that I hope every higher education institution will join because I think it just represents so much potential for the future, not only of Black Canadians, but also for Canada and especially for universities who are pillars of the Canadian society. So I call on all institutions to join in this effort.
Those testimonials were powerful and really speak to the importance of the charter and moving forward. Thank you, Barbara, Charlene, and June. We are also hopeful and excited about the Scarborough Charter and really what it represents to all of us. Next, I would like to invite Wisdom Tete again to moderate our panel for the discussion. Wisdom?
Thank you, Karima. And so let me start off by introducing our panelists. So we do have a panel of 5 colleagues who would answer some questions that we think are pertinent for all of us to consider. There'll be an opportunity for Q&A, so please feel free to put in any questions you may have, and hopefully we have time to share with the panelists. But also share your own thoughts in the comments. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. We have Frank Otabor, Senior Strategy Consultant at CIBC, and who is a recent grad of the Rutman School at U of T. Next is Teresa Rajak-Telly, who is Vice Provost, Equity and Inclusion at Dalhousie University. And then following Teresa is Melinda Smith, Vice Provost and Associate Vice President Research, EDI, at the University of Calgary. And my neighbor here, Craig Stevenson, who is President and CEO of Centennial College here in Toronto. And my next door neighbor on this floor, Kimberly Tall, who is the Director of Community and Learning Partnerships and Access Pathways here at the University of Toronto Scarborough. So colleagues, welcome to this discussion session. And we'll go through 2 rounds of questions. Each panelist has about 2 minutes or so to respond. And hopefully we'll be able to get in as much as we're able to. So Frank, let's start with you. As someone who has recently graduated from university, what do you see as the Scarborough Charter delivering to the next generation of Black students that your generation did not receive?
Thanks, Wisdom, for the question. I think to me, the major opportunity for the next generation is that it gives them a chance to connect their learning with their life experience. And this is important because when you do that effectively, you increase experimentation, which leads to innovation. And you also improve retention because people can close the gap with the information given and how to translate it. And this is a big deal, especially with the Scarborough Charter that champions inclusive excellence and mutuality through bringing in more Black faculty, using cluster hire, and also giving voice to research about the Black community. And I'll give you a story. I championed or founded the Students Against Anti-Black Racism Committee at Rothman School of Management. And I remember we went to meet all the professors and we were trying to get them to pledge to diversify their curriculum. And the accounting professor had said yes. Now, one of the things that really happened was towards the end of my program, you would think it's accounting, right? It's all numbers. There is no story to be told. But towards the end of my program, he sent me an article, and it's about Aliko Dangote from the Nigerian community. And I remember reading this article, and I'm so engaged, and I'm going back and forth with him, and he's replying, and he's giving me his perspective. But I graduated. I really didn't need accounting at that point. But it dawned on me, what about a student who is sitting in that classroom today? They need that. And if I was disengaged, they will probably be, because what the professor had done at that moment was connect my learning with my experience. And that's what we all want.
Thank you. Thank you. So now let's move on to Teresa. Teresa, so how can we operationalize the Scarborough Charter, particularly its first principle of Black flourishing, in institutions that are founded on colonialism and anti-Blackness and Black exclusion in a lot of ways?
Thank you for the question, Wisdom. The answer is simply, we cannot do it based on the same structures that we have. It's a simple but complex and challenging concept. It requires systematic and intentional transformation of our structures. And that's why the Charter is so important, because the Charter gives us the guide on how to do this. So the Charter has 4 basic principles, but under each of those principles, there are actionable items that tell us how to do this. For example, the concept of governance. We need to diversify our decision-making structures at all levels. Research, teaching, and learning. We need to recognize and diversify ways of knowing, and also appreciate and include that the Black experience, culture, and knowledge are worthy of knowing. And last but not least, community engagement. Community engagement makes us responsible and accountable to the inequities of Black communities and other marginalized communities, but it also allows us to recognize the great contribution that Black communities are making and can continue to make if we follow the Charter's basic principles and actionable items.
Great, thank you, Teresa. I'll turn now to Melinda. Melinda, considering the reality that institutions have not historically delivered on the rhetoric, there's an understandably, understandable skepticism about what makes the Scarborough Charter different. How can institutions hold themselves and each other to account relative to the actions outlined in the Charter?
Thank you for that question, Wisdom. I think it's important to recall that this skepticism was evident during the summer of discontent and during the autumn of racial reckoning that informed the national dialogue and actions over a year ago. And it reminds us, I think, in a way of what James Baldwin said in 1966. I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. What the Scarborough Charter process did over a year of deep consultations with the broader community, with higher education institutions, with national bodies, it led to a voluntary collaboration, co-constitution of a charter in which institutions, universities, colleges, and CGEPs committed themselves. This wasn't legislative compliance. This was voluntary co-constitutions and compliance. That's fundamentally different. The second thing, and that's historic, never before in the history of Canadian universities have so many institutions come together to say, we recognize the problem, we recognize our limits, and we need to go from commitment to action, from talk to action. And we need to do that in several ways. So to amplify what Teresa had to say, we need to go do that in terms of Underrepresentation, that means collecting disaggregated data in a responsible way. Second, we need to think about that in terms of teaching and learning. We need to think about the curriculum. So you see the emergence of Black studies programs. You see the emergence of African studies program. We also need to think about accountability in terms of the experiences of Black students, faculty, and staff in the classroom. So that's dealing with anti-Black racism, racial biases such as unconscious demotion, in terms of emotional tax, in terms of the diversity tax. We need to think about this in terms of the research ecosystem. So there's an insistence that we want Black research chairs, we want investment in awards and scholarships. And this is not because we're giving Black folks anything, but for over a century and more, Black scholars have contributed to the Canadian Academy in hidden ways. And this is a recognition of Black excellence. And I think you see this in terms of the commitment.
Melinda,
Thank you.
Sorry to cut you off, but I think we had an understanding. So please, I'm not being rude. Everybody understands that we've given ourselves license to.
I was done. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll turn to Craig next. So Craig, the Scarborough Charter requires racially responsive leadership to deliver on the actions outlined in it. What does this leadership entail, and how can it be enabled in the higher education sector?
Thanks, Wisdom. It was Dr. Sean Harper who coined the term racially responsive leadership and delivered the keynote address at a recent summit co-hosted by Centennial and UTSC that spoke about the importance of redressing racism with intentionality, of building racially just workplaces, achieving equitable outcomes, and ensuring institutional accountability. As charter signatories, we must recognize that as institutional leaders, whether board members or presidents, the priorities we set, the positions we take, and the changes we implement absolutely can and do impact Black, Indigenous, and racialized peoples. To mobilize change, we need a collective vision for advancing true and meaningful inclusion, building racially responsive leadership, and addressing racial injustice. And that, Wisdom, is exactly what the Charter is about. One of the core principles of the Charter is, as Frank referred to earlier, inclusive excellence, which entails, and I quote, the ability to educate and to innovate, to be alive to complexity and proactive in the face of crisis, to foster fundamental questioning through rigorous, respectful engagements across difference, and to enable societal transformation. This is where, as educators, we have a duty of care. If a student arrives with racist views, that's one thing. But if they leave at the end of their program with those views unchallenged and unchanged, then that's another. And we must revise our teaching and learning strategies accordingly. Likewise, systemic barriers that stifle our students' talent and limit their potential must be rapidly identified and dismantled. Thank you, Wisdom.
Thank you, Craig. So now I'll go back to Frank. Frank, as you transition to the workplace with your career aspirations, what do you see as the role of higher educational institutions in enabling Black flourishing and Black inclusion outside of the academy?
To me, I think the role of the institutions is to continue to champion or close that information challenges that the Black community faces. And this would be through bringing in or recruiting more Black students into the pipeline, because evidently it flows and it trickles down into bringing more Black people into the workforce as well. And what happens when it's done well is that everyone benefits, not just the Black community, but also the higher institutions and also the workforce. And I'll tell you why. It's because you're not just hiring a Black student or bringing in a Black person into the workforce, but you're bringing in problem solvers with diverse perspectives and diverse life experiences. And I remember I grew up in Nigeria, and I went and after my junior WAEC, my principal sat me down in the room and she was asking me, where do you want to go? And if you have any leaning towards the STEM program, they put you in this advanced mathematics class. And I was in one of those classes. And this teacher had taught us a particular problem, and she told us the method we should use. So the next day she comes back with an assignment and says, who solved it? And one of the smartest guys in the room, Tager, he stands up, he goes to the board and he solves the problem exactly the way she taught us. And we're about to move on when Chiki, another guy in the room, raises his hand and says, there's another way to solve this problem. And he comes over and he uses a matrix. Now, I remember how he solved it. It was a matrix equation. And in no time, it was done. It was simpler, faster, better. And that's the role of higher institutions. When you bring in or recruit more Black people and it translates into the workforce, you get simpler, better, faster problem solvers.
Thank you. So now let me turn to Kimberly. So Kimberly, can you share with us some ways in which the higher education sector can concretely reflect the principle of mutuality in their interactions with Black communities and organizations?
Thank you, Wisdom. The notion of mutuality speaks to being place-based anchor institutions who are civically responsible, present, consistent, humble, transparent, and accountable. The Charter calls for rethinking, restructuring of foundational components of institutions and actively and intentionally changing the ways in which they function and interact with Black communities. This can be exampled through place-based community and impact investing in Black communities, establishing social procurements, community benefits, and inclusive hiring and promotion strategies that align with Black community wealth building strategies, and addressing issues of trust and accountability as it relates to data collection and production. Understanding the correlation between education and economics, higher education needs to build on the historical efforts within Black communities by co-designing and establishing deliberate access pathways for Black students and learners and with corresponding culturally appropriate wraparound supports that involve parents, guardians, and extended circles of care. It's about creating specific and explicit opportunities for investing in the vibrant work of Black communities, whether that's via co-developing community engaged scholarship opportunities that leverages the work already taking place in communities, or investing in physical spaces or social enterprises that center Black perspectives and values and go beyond tokenism and instead cultivates Black flourishing. This then requires institutions to embrace Black communities' varied models of learning, education, leadership, governance, and economics. And it's imperative to situate strategies of inclusive economic development within a framework rooted in traditional principles at the core of Black communities, acknowledging the collective action, self-determination, relationality, and intelligence of Black communities to develop their own culturally specific strategies of liberation, health, and well-being. Thereby, it necessitates higher education to function in a framework that exists outside of the bounds of colonialism. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So, Teresa, you're up next. So there is a perception among some that by promoting Black inclusion, institutions will be undermining excellence. How should higher education institutions address this perception as they pursue their commitments to the Scarborough Charter?
Thanks for that question, Wisdom. The new buzzword in the university and colleges circuit is inclusive excellence. And a simple response to your question is that I see just the opposite. It reinforces, diversity reinforces the concept of excellence. But I think we need to reconsider what we mean by inclusive and what we mean by excellence. Are we talking about more of the same or improving the same? Or are we talking about redefining what is inclusive and what is excellence? To me, excellence is amplified by strengthening inclusive diversity. It must have elements of fairness, equity, ethics, and integrity. Otherwise, we can look at excellence not so much as a mask of quality, but a mark of privilege. The privilege that defines what we in universities and colleges treat as standards and merits. Are we talking about diversifying the who, but keeping the norm? Focusing on the individual merits that mask historically marginalized and discriminated historical groups? I leave it with the question rather than the answer. Thanks.
Thank you. So that takes us to Melinda, so this next question for you. And as you know, a key focus for the interinstitutional forum that is going to be these consortium of signatory institutions is working together to address existing gaps in relevant data to support the actions in the Scarborough Charter. How can we work together as a sector to address the challenge and to promote responsible use and sharing of data?
Again, I would say that thank you for the question, the process of this Scarborough Charter, of the National Dialogues and Scarborough Charter are processes to build on for transformation. So the Interinstitutional Forum can build on and extend this collaboration in terms of the principle of mutuality and also accountability by actually developing a next generation approach to EDI data collection. And when I say the next generation, it's building on what already exists, what we learned from the 12 principles of the Employment Equity and Federal Contractors Program, the need for collect workforce data, complete workforce analysis, establish short-term and medium-term goal, adopt measures to remove barriers, and adopt positive policies for change. We know that these did not happen with employment equity, and what this Scarborough Charter does is allows us to build on and support, for example, the Task Force on Employment Equity Act review, to build on and support the UCAS modernization system that calls for disaggregated data, but also for developing shared and collaborative methodologies, data collection, analysis, and so on. So I think that the collaboration that this work has done is the perfect space from which to move into the next generation of EDI data collection, not just in hiring, and student experience, but also in terms of the research and scholarship. So yes, we need all of those things from the Federal Contractors Program taken to a next level, and this kind of experience helps us get there.
Thank you. So now I'll go to Kimberly, because I think my eyes are suffering from just staring at screens for a long day. So I think Craig is my next person to go to. So Craig, drawing on your institution's location within Scarborough, how do you ensure that the charter is in fact seen as supporting communities in which we're embedded, and that they play their rightful role as anchor partners in the communities where they're located?
Thanks for that wisdom. The charter's name, the Scarborough Charters, the national dialogues that led to the creation of the charter were hosted in Scarborough, as you know, in October 2020. But the reference to Scarborough in the charter title also reminds us that the charter is very, very firmly embedded in the community that a university or college serves. And you will find that the charter speaks specifically to mutuality with Black communities, noting that universities and colleges play a special role in Black community economic development as anchor institutions and local employers. And speaking from a college perspective, over 95% of Canadians reside within 50 kilometres of a college campus. Colleges are firmly embedded in the fabric of their local communities, and they're therefore duty-bound to support regional economic and social development. And here in Scarborough, for example, racialized and underserved communities have been disproportionately exposed to pandemic-related socioeconomic disparities. Hence the importance of partnering with the Scarborough Health Network to launch a vaccination centre on campus and sustain it on campus, even when students are returning, in order to reach out to those who may be hesitant because of experiences with medical racism. We're also partnering with UTSC, and thank you for that wisdom, who's the key lead, and other Scarborough anchor institutions, and Taibu Community Health Centre, which serves Black identifying communities to engage in COVID-19 conversations and address head-on the health inequities that have been brought into sharper focus as a consequence of COVID. Thank you, wisdom.
Thank you, Craig. My next question goes to Kimberly. And so how can higher education institutions create a welcoming and supportive environment for Black staff to flourish? to feel valued and to feel a sense of belonging as bona fide members of our communities.
Thank you, Wisdom. I think what would be required is a centering of Black staff, their experiences, relationships, and networks by purposefully developing supportive communities for staff to flourish in a space that is not violent or harmful. Ensuring Black voices and knowledges are embedded in decision-making structures at all levels, devoting resources toward efforts that actually enhance the lives of Black staff, such as implementing systems and processes that not only support career progression, but create space for collective healing and care, and by creating accountability structures that center anti-Black racism. Black employees often also take on additional physical and emotional labor of mentoring, supporting, caring, and creating community for Black folks on campus and advancing social justice and equity movements within the workplace. This work needs to be seen and honored, recognizing that this work is not it's the responsibility of all and not just for Black staff. The Charter is tasking higher education to move beyond performative to foundational, systemic, and structural change, diversing from extractive practices that reinforce racial capitalism towards a direction of addressing co-joining issues of anti-Black racism and socioeconomic inequalities, ceasing attempts to force Black staff to fit into an existing structure and culture. Instead, institutions must go below the surface and reframe, regenerate, and reimagine new structures. To do so, they must apply an intersectional lens and recognize the overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination Black staff face due to their race, gender, sexuality, gender identity, ability, and other critical forms of identity. Only then can a new system be created that gives space for Black staff to flourish, feel valued, and a sense of belonging. I'll end with a quote from Courtney McClooney and Veronica Rebello from the book Race, Work, and Leadership. Companies should focus on managing injustice rather than managing Blackness. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, panelists. You've had a chance to respond to questions from me, but now we're opening it up for participants to send in questions that I'll direct to panel members. So let's start with our first question. And I think there are a couple of questions here that reflect the concern about accountability. So let me read those out. Now, how do you ensure that university signatories follow through on the commitment versus using this as a public relations strategy to position themselves as competitive and as a leader in EDI? So, I think if we can get all the panelists back on, I could direct it to anyone as you wish. So who wants to take this one on? Melinda.
I'm gonna let the university president go first, the college president.
Oh, I didn't see you there, sorry. Craig?
Oh, thank you so much, Melinda. Thank you, and I'll be very quick on this, but I think this is a really important question. And we have, as presidents, to be absolutely accountable to this, to our communities and to our board. And I can tell you that our board is very interested in this area, wants to see progress in this area, and they will hold me accountable. But more importantly, we are working with an anti-Black racism task force here at Centennial. And so this ties in, and we've got it's quite a large group, and they too will be expecting movement and will be working with me and holding us accountable to this. So this charter hasn't just been signed by me without working with the Anti-Black Racism Task Force and ensuring it's in sync with what we're doing and embedding it into business plans, into strategies, and into the heart of what we're doing. So there is no shying away from this at all, and then being accountable to this group wisdom as well. And colleagues might want to comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Melinda.
Thank you, Madam. And again, I will return to James Baldwin. People are tired of the talk. They're tired of the statements. They've seen the commitments. A year ago, following the death of George Floyd, they want action. And so my view is that we see these signatories for the Scarborough Charter who are saying they could have not come to the table. They could have not come to the table. They chose to. So my view is we see, and we are hoping that this will follow through a commitment to action. But they know the action plan in the Scarborough Charter, they know the principles, and they know that students and the community are fatigued by lip service. So I think I hope we are seeing a moment of racial reckoning in universities where we have not seen this before. And we know that our universities have not had racial equity or racial justice strategies. They've had other forms of equity strategies. So this is the first time that we are actually taking anti-racism and racial equity seriously. So it's going to be incumbent upon all of us to continue to hold ourselves and our institutions accountable.
Thank you. So let me move on to another question. And this is one that says, well, there are institutions that have existing anti-racism strategies or action plans. And so what kinds of change management and communications processes would you recommend for transitioning the Scarborough Charter into these institutions as the guiding strategy? So I think this would apply to those who have and those who are in the process of developing these strategies. So who wants to take this one? Teresa?
Thanks, Wisdom, for putting that one to me. Yeah, I mean, I think that, universities and colleges are at different stages. There's some who just, talk about diversity and having diversity officers and frameworks and so on. Diversity, in my view, has not worked because diversity overshadows the concept of race and racism. It waters it down. So in cases like that, a charter like this will bring it up front and say, no, you cannot subsume it under diversity. It requires point attention. For universities like mine at Dalhousie, where we do have a strategic framework, we have my office, we have plans, and including our new university institutional initiative that covers similar principles as the charter. What I see happening is that we are integrating what the charter has outlined into our action plans. So it is highlighting some of the things that we need to do, but more importantly, it's going to keep us accountable, not only internally, but externally by signing on this charter. And we are ready for the task.
Thank you. Thank you. And Frank, I'll direct this one to you. So how can institutions bring alumni into this work, right? Particularly Black alumni as partners in this effort?
I think to bring in Black alumni, you could do it through, I call it incentive programs, but it's not really monitorable, non-monetary incentive programs. There are so many different challenges that the Black community faces, and every alumni has passed through one of these challenges while at the higher institution. So it's channeling and really communicating that and explaining what the drive would be towards the next generation. For example, I talked about the fact that in my own, during my experience, there were very few Black students in my classroom, and there was very limited course content that actually talked about all of that. Challenging or incentive, like the incentive for me would be when I get called upon to say, all right, we're looking at this initiative or this program that is going to diversify the curriculum, that is going to make things better for the next generation. That's an incentive for me to get involved, because I want to see the next person who comes into that same university, not just be a number, but to thrive. So I believe it's usually, for me, when I think about how to bring in alumni, I really think about driving the communication in such a way that really tackles a lot of those challenges that the ones before, the predecessors, have faced. And explaining it to them that way, you would actually see a lot of drive for them to help these successors.
Wisdom, can I jump in on this question too?
Okay, take this one, because I had one that I was going to direct to you, but please go ahead.
Thank you. I will just thank you, Frank. I think what I would add to that is I mentioned about being involved in decision-making structures. I think when we look at our governance structures for institutions, oftentimes you don't see the Black community reflected in there, and that's a space where alumni could actually play a really critical role. They have intimate knowledge of the institution from a student perspective, and then also from a community perspective. So involving Black alumni in that space, creating mentorship programs and sponsorship programs for How do we connect in from pathways from undergrad and even reaching further back to Black alumni? And then I would even say we've been recently having conversations about mentorship programs for Black staff and sponsorship programs and reaching out to alumni because we don't have enough representation within the institutions for Black leadership. So how do we utilize folks in the community such as alumni to be able to support those efforts?
Thank you. Thank you, Kimberly. There are several other questions and certainly we wouldn't have time to address them, but I'll just throw a couple out there for all of us to think about. And one is, how do we deal with the real issue of racism as we're doing this work? Because there are a lot of people who are doing the heavy lifting of moving this work forward and yet have to contend with the reality of racism. And so what is the role of the institution to enable this work in a way that protects those individuals who are standing for what the institutions profess to be committed to? There's also a question about how we deal with the ebbs and flows of the political climate in which we function. And are we likely to be victims of these swings and what the implication might be for the charter? Are we committed to this as fundamental and foundational principles that say everyone deserves equity, and therefore, irrespective of the political climate, we're going to move this forward? And then the last question I want to share with you is about, should climate surveys be part of this exercise of peer reviews that hopefully gets embedded in the work of the Interinstitutional Forum? So a lot of food for thought. Certainly, we're not going to answer all of them here, but as we work together as partners, these are realities that we have to contend with. And so with that, I want us to move to the official signing of the charter. And so I'll turn to my colleagues. In the absence of us being able to meet together in person, we've tried to do the next best thing. And so these institutional leaders are going to be signing virtually on behalf of their institutions. So I'll turn to Kim to roll tape. And before we get to that, I just want to say once again, panelists, thank you so much for making the time. Thank you for your thoughtful and insightful responses to the questions. And hopefully we all take a lot from what you shared with us this afternoon. So thank you, all of you. Congratulations on this unique accomplishment as a sector. And the work is just beginning, but we're all looking forward to what it is that will be delivered through this collaborative effort. And with that, I'm going to turn it over for some closing remarks from tireless leader on the charter, the principal drafter for the charter, Dr. Adele Blackett from the university, from McGill University, to share a few concluding thoughts with us. So Adele, take us home.
Thank you so much, Wisdom, co-members of the Interinstitutional Advisory Committee, signing partners, each insightful participant and audience member today, and all who have contributed to the year-long co-creation process for the shared vision that inhabits the Scarborough Charter. I'm the descendant of enslaved Africans in the Americas, joining you for this historic launch from the traditional unceded territories of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. I am grateful for the heritage of ancestors who have worked relentlessly for émancipation. Fille du Québec, par la position économique et sociale de notre famille et notre communauté, je n'étais pas destinée à devenir professeur, loin de là. Mais j'ai pu bénéficier le long de ma trajectoire académique des encouragements, de la confiance, de l'engagement à la fois de nombreux membres des lieux de l'enseignement et de membres de nos communautés qui œuvraient pour un avenir inclusif. La charte de Scarborough vise à leur rendre hommage. Drawing on the co-creation process and the discussion this past hour, I'd like to suggest that the Scarborough Charter may be seen both as an archive of special significance in this moment and a framework of action inspiring our future engagements. As an archive, the Scarborough Charter chronicles in its preamble Black communities' insistence against all odds of our profound humanity. It offers at once an acknowledgement of how much academic excellence has historically been lost through exclusion and silencing, and a reclaiming of presence, of belonging, grounded in purposeful centering of the experiences, contributions, and aspirations of people of African descent in higher education in Canada. As a framework, it offers precise, detailed, and comprehensive guidance, catalyzing action within an architecture that enables institutional actors in the higher education sector to share data and inform practices, to foster and strengthen implementation, and hold each other accountable. Both the archive and the framework offer an ontological affirmation of Black life through a collective act of refusal to draw on Kanien'kehá:ka scholar Audra Simpson's work, that is refusal of an exclusionary status quo. That refusal and the archive and framework it has engendered open up boundless possibilities. To invoke legendary Caribbean scholar C.L.R. James's famous affirmation from his semi-autobiographical unending allegory of cricket beyond a boundary, it is movement that matters, not where you are, where you have, what you have, but where you have come from, where you were going, and the rate at which you were getting there. Signing the charter signals not an end point, but a commitment to keep moving beyond where we were in Canadian higher education, captured in the archive toward where we are going through a framework designed to propel us forward with determination to realize the Charter's principles of intersectional Black flourishing, which includes, dare I say, the spirit of Sankofa, of going back to get what's ours, cultivating, honoring the contributions of excellence that are in reality all around us, of inclusive excellence, or the opportunity to look anew at our academic world, changing what it feels like to walk in a room that is inhabited by plural communities and traditions of excellence, broadening and fostering the emergence of alternative canons, of mutuality embodied in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words, our common inescapable garment of destiny, and of accountability, challenging ourselves and our institutions of higher education, in late poet Maya Angelou's words, to do better when we know better. If we let it, the Scarborough Charter can be part of a living process, resolutely, steadfastly positioning Canadian higher education at the vanguard of transformative change. But forgive me for closing with a caution. My late colleague at McGill and former Royal Society of Canada President Rod MacDonald reminded us through CLR James's words that to know the rules, to clothe oneself in the rules and to act in conformity with them, even to know the spirit of the rules is not enough. He stressed that the problem is resolutely not with attempts to adapt the rules to local context. That is to be expected and anticipated. Rather, he was concerned that in the absence of an intention to organize conduct purposively to achieve its objectives, one is not playing the game, one is simply playing at the game, or possibly even playing with the game. We must avoid EDI with a vengeance, recalling instead the truth of the popular maxim, nothing for us without us. The racial reckoning of this past year is a reminder of the pernicious legacies of enslavement and anti-Black racism and the extent of the trust that must be rebuilt with care and with the love of justice to move forward. We have a tremendous opportunity through the Scarborough Charter's ongoing co-creation process in the interinstitutional forum and steering committees and the material support that member institutions must bring to these, to work with purpose to move beyond the boundary of anti-Black racism, to foster meaningful inclusion in Canadian higher education for all equity deserving groups. We can co-create an academia in the world where members of all communities can pursue truth in excellence, live, learn, and flourish. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Adele. Powerful way to end this launch. And I'll direct folks to the link that you have, I think it's been posted in the chat. And there you would hear, you saw the signing from the institutional leaders, but please go to the website and hear them articulate in their own words why they signed the charter. So with that, thank you all so very much for being part of this momentous occasion, for your support in getting us here. And we're counting on all of you to be part of the journey to get us to the ultimate outcome that we all collectively seek. Take care, all the best, and bye-bye.